You check your phone before you even open your eyes. The time is right there, glowing, exact to the second. You didn't earn that number. You didn't calculate it. It was just given to you. But for most of human history, there was no glowing number. There was no given answer. And yet your ancestors knew things about time that you have completely forgotten how to know. For roughly 20,000 years, humans kept time with bones. Not clocks, not calendars printed on paper. Bones. Small, carved, scratched pieces of animal rib and antler, covered in tiny notches that look, at first glance, like nothing at all. Random scratches. The kind of thing you'd dismiss if you found it in the dirt. But these weren't random. They were some of the earliest math humans ever did. And they were tracking something you track every single day without noticing it. The moon. Here's the strange part. You'd think keeping time would require writing. Numbers? Something we'd recognize as a system. It didn't. It required watching the sky night after night for years and translating what you saw into your hands. Let's slow down and reconstruct this properly, because the story gets stranger the closer you look. In 1960, a Belgian geologist named Jean de Heinzelin was excavating near the headwaters of the Nile, in what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He uncovered a small bone, about 10 centimeters long, carved from the fibula of a baboon. One end had a sharp piece of quartz still embedded in it, like a handle for a tool. But the shaft of the bone was covered in rows of notches, grouped in strange, deliberate clusters. This became known as the Ishango bone, and it is one of the oldest mathematical artifacts ever discovered, dated to somewhere between 20,000 and 25,000 years ago. At first, researchers assumed it was a tally stick, a simple hunting count: kill one animal, cut one notch. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Except the notches weren't simple. They came in groups, and the groups weren't random. One row adds up to 60. Another adds up to 48. The numbers cluster around values that are suspiciously close to a lunar month. This is where an American paleoanthropologist named Alexander Marshack changed the conversation entirely. In the 1970s, Marshack examined the Ishango bone and dozens of other engraved bones from Ice Age Europe under a microscope, and he noticed something the naked eye misses. The notches weren't all made at once, with the same tool, in the same sitting. They were made in short bursts over time, with slightly different pressure and slightly different blade angles. In other words, someone kept coming back to this bone, again and again, adding a little more each time. What kind of record gets added to a little at a time, over and over, for months? A calendar. Marshack proposed that these bones were lunar tally systems. Someone, somewhere in the Ice Age, was watching the moon change shape every night and marking it down. Not counting kills, counting days, waiting, watching, adding one small scratch at a time as the moon swelled from a sliver into a full bright circle and shrank back into darkness again. Think about what that actually requires. You have to notice that the moon has a pattern in the first place. You have to watch it long enough, on enough different nights, in enough different weather, to realize the pattern repeats roughly every 29 or 30 days. Then you have to trust that pattern enough to build a habit around it. Then you have to invent a way to record it, using nothing but a bone and a sharp rock, before anyone had invented writing, before anyone had invented the wheel, before agriculture even existed anywhere on the planet. This wasn't idle skywatching. This was survival infrastructure. If you were a hunter-gatherer in the Ice Age, the moon told you things you desperately needed to know. Full moons meant bright nights, good for traveling or hunting certain animals, dangerous for others. New moons meant total darkness, which changed what predators were active and what plants could be foraged safely. Some archaeologists have connected lunar tracking to the migration and spawning patterns of fish and game, cycles that mattered enormously to people whose next meal depended on knowing exactly when a river would fill with salmon or when a herd would move through a valley. A wrong guess about timing wasn't an inconvenience. It could mean a season of hunger. Now push the story forward, roughly 12,000 years, to a very different piece of evidence. Not a bone. A field in Aberdeenshire, Scotland, called Warren Field. In 2004, archaeologists surveying the site for a housing development found a strange arrangement of 12 pits dug into the ground in a long, deliberate arc. For years, nobody knew quite what to make of it. Then in 2013, a team led by archaeologist Vince Gaffney at the University of Birmingham published an analysis that reframed the entire site. The 12 pits, they argued, mirrored the phases of the moon across a full lunar month, and the whole arc was oriented toward the point on the horizon where the sun rises on the winter solstice. Every year, on the shortest, darkest day of the year, the entire monument would have realigned itself, resetting the calendar for the next cycle. This structure has been dated to around 8000 BC, making it, by some estimates, the oldest known calendar constructed by human hands anywhere on Earth. 10,000 years before Stonehenge, roughly 5,000 years before the first cities of Mesopotamia existed. Built by people with no writing, no metal tools, and no permanent settlements, who nonetheless dug 12 pits into a Scottish hillside with enough precision that modern astronomers can still verify the alignment today. So let's reconstruct what this actually looked like, in practice for the people living it. Picture a small group settled near a river valley, in what is now Scotland 10,000 years ago. Winter is closing in. The days are getting shorter, colder, the sun barely climbing above the tree line before it sinks again. Someone in the group, maybe an elder, maybe someone whose job within the group is simply to watch and remember, walks the length of the 12 pits every few nights. They note where the moon sits in the sky. They know, because it has been passed down to them, which pit corresponds to which phase. As the moon swells and thins across the month, they track it against the pits, and they track the pits against the horizon, waiting for the sunrise to slide to that one specific point where the Earth briefly holds still before tilting back the other way. That single sunrise mattered enormously. It told them the worst of winter had turned. It told them when to expect certain plants to return, when herds would begin moving again, how many months of stored food needed to last. Getting this wrong wasn't abstract. It was the difference between rationing correctly and running out. Here is the part that should genuinely surprise you. This is more precise and more mathematically sophisticated than most people alive today are capable of doing without a device. Ask someone right now, without looking at a phone, what phase the moon is in tonight. Most people have no idea. We have fully outsourced something our ancestors tracked with obsessive life-or-death accuracy. And that leads to the twist, the part of this story that flips the whole assumption on its head. We tend to imagine ancient humans as living in a kind of timeless haze, drifting through days with no real sense of structure, waiting around for us to invent clocks and calendars to bring order to their lives. That assumption is backwards. The truth is closer to the opposite. Ancient humans were arguably more attuned to time than we are, not less. They didn't have a clock on the wall, so they had to become the clock. Their bodies, their bones, their monuments, their whole way of watching the sky were the timekeeping technology. We didn't invent time awareness, we just outsourced it. And in outsourcing it, we lost the skill entirely. There's a researcher whose work makes this even sharper. French prehistorian Francesco D'Errico, building on Marshack's methods decades later, re-examined engraved bones from multiple Ice Age sites using high-resolution microscopy and confirmed that many of these objects show the same pattern Marshack first identified. Incremental engraving, added over extended periods, consistent with ongoing observational recording rather than one-off decoration. In other words, this wasn't a one-time craft project. It was a habit, maintained night after night for a purpose that mattered enough to keep doing it. Now, bring this back to you and your own relationship with time. You almost certainly do not know what phase the moon is in tonight. You probably don't know what day sunrise occurs earliest or latest in your region without checking an app. You have a phone that hands you the exact second, down to a precision your Ice Age ancestors could never have imagined, and in exchange, you have lost the raw, embodied sense of time that they carried in their bones, quite literally, in their bones. There's something worth sitting with here. Your ancestors' sense of time wasn't given to them. They built it, night by night, notch by notch, pit by pit, out of nothing but attention. The moon didn't hand them a calendar. They made one by watching closely enough for long enough that a pattern in the sky became a pattern they could hold in their hands. You check your phone before you even open your eyes. The time is right there, glowing, exact to the second. You didn't earn that number. But somewhere behind that number, Carved into a bone 20,000 years old is someone who did.